Well, the gods of technology are not smiling upon us today. We've just wasted a lot of time trying to set this up, and things have not gone well. My firewall antivirus program was messing with XSplit and various other things. Whatever. So, let's get going here. So, I'm having a chat with Swordsage, and we're going to be talking about weapons and stuff. Who would have thought, right? On this channel. Okay. So, at the end, we're also going to talk about what's been going on with him recently, for those who are interested. And, yeah, so let's get going. I wanted to talk about favorite weapons, because it's been a while since I talked about my favorite swords, and things have changed a little bit since then.
Okay, well, as far as favorite weapons go, I mean, everybody already knows that this is one of them, so I'm not even going to mention it. But one weapon, there've been a couple of weapons that I've recently have gained a further appreciation of. Like, I've always tended to like them, but I'm getting a deeper appreciation for them. And one of them is the staff. Like, it's, you know, in Chinese martial arts, they call it like the grandfather of all weapons, because from that one, you can like pretty much bridge off into other weapons, particularly polearms. Because, you know, with the staff, all you gotta do is put a spearhead in there, you got a spear, you know, put like a hook in there, you got a halberd, you know, things like that. And many of the techniques cross over. The thing that I'm really appreciating about the staff is just the fact that it's such a versatile weapon, and it's something that you can pretty much find something that's staff-like. You know, a tree branch, a broomstick, a long length of pipe. And I mean, even back in the past, you know, somebody needing to defend themselves, if they happen to have a walking staff or a walking stick, if they happen to walk in the forest and they find, you know, a branch or something that they can use to, like, you know, fend off whoever's coming after them, you know, it's viable, it's usable. And just about every last culture has some form of staff fighting, you know, be it quarterstaffs in England, you know, be it, of course, the, you know, the staff techniques in Asia, you know, there's so many different, you know, cultures that realize that, hey, we can fight with this. In fact, it probably is one of the very first weapons that people learn how to use, you know, both in terms of humanity and in terms of individuals learning martial arts. So, and not only that, but the techniques are, you know, pretty powerful and, you know, in the right hands, and they're very versatile. And I've just gained more of an appreciation for the weapon itself. So that's definitely a favorite of mine these days.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot to like about the quarterstaff. I also have quite an appreciation for it, for the same reasons. Again, it applies to other weapons, and European martial arts is the same thing. Staff techniques can be applied to a spear. There is actually quite a number of thrusts in the manual, the quarterstaff manuals, because you can still effectively thrust with a quarterstaff. It's not going to be as effective as with a spear, but it's very applicable and viable. And of course, the quarterstaff was very useful as an everyday item in medieval Europe. So people would just use that as a walking stick. They would use it to knock down fruit from trees and to prod the ground to see if it's safe, and things like a wide variety of uses. And it would also be very effective for striking. You can really crack someone over the head with it pretty effectively. And you've got lots of reach. You know, for example, if you're going up against a blade of whatever sword, be it a knife, a sword, anything like that, you're going to be at quite an advantage. So leverage and all of that. It's a very effective tool, often underestimated. Although it depends on who you ask. If you ask George Silver, it's the bestest weapon ever. In fact, there are some quotes by George Silver from his Paradoxes of Defense, written in 1699. The short staff is the best weapon against all manner of weapons. And also, for a man that rightly understands it, may bid defiance and laugh at other weapons, at any other weapon. So he was a bit of a quarterstaff fanboy, if you will. He also passionately hated the rapier, just as a side note. It's kind of funny, the degrees of nerd rage to which he goes in a historical manner.
All right, so another weapon that I could pick that I've gained an appreciation for is, I mean, it has many different names. I think the one that most people have heard of is the term deer horn knives. I've also heard of them called bagua knives or deer antler knives or mandarin duck axes. Like, there's a lot of freaking names for them, but it's just these weird, like, double crescent shaped like knives or daggers or something. Like they tend to be about like yay big, and sometimes a little bit bigger, but they're used in pairs. It's like one in each hand, and they got blades. They basically made of two crescent hook blades, one that curves this way and one that curves this way. And you basically use them in pairs, and one hand generally will defend while the other hand attacks, or one hand will trap the other person's weapon, or maybe even hook their limbs or hook them and pull them in, and the other one strikes. And of course, they're used in tandem. I've always liked paired weapons, dual weapons. They basically can correspond with hand-to-hand techniques, like whatever you're doing barehanded can transfer over to these sorts of things with a little bit of modification. I've always liked weapons like that. And in these in particular, I really liked because of how versatile they can be, in terms of their usage. Like I said, you can deflect and trap and hook and pull in, and the other one does all the business. And I just happen to like, the fact that you got, the blades hooking toward the opponent, but you also got blades hooking away that could be used to deflect, whack this way, or, hook this way. They're sort of used similarly to, I guess, a karambit. Where like since you got that, hook in the bottom, you can kind of use it to like, hook into somebody's limb, or like, trap them and pull them in that way and then attack with the other hand, or what if you happen to have another weapon.
If you happen to hold two karambits in one hand and they will both stick out.
That's sort of like how they are. They look kind of like two karambits, but then with an extra karambit that's curving the other way as well. Like it's weird, but I tend to like the way they're used. And I'm hoping that one of these days I can, find an instructor who knows how to use these, who can show me how to use these things, because these are not weapons that I'm going to try to learn how to use myself. Sorry, no. But these are also favorites of mine. I really like how they're employed traditionally, by the way. There are a lot of modern wushu, contemporary wushu reinterpretations of the techniques that are, well, pretty much performance and dance. But the traditional use of it is, while it looks pretty, it's a lot more effective.
I should probably also say a few words about the paired weapons thing. Like, there are, of course, some objections to dual wielding in the sense of, two swords, two axes, and all of that. And plenty of people have discussed that before, me included. And like the way it's often presented in fantasy settings, where they wield like two full-size swords or two big axes, or sometimes even like the Diablo 2 barbarian, two great swords, which is, that's getting a little silly. So there are some issues with that. It has sometimes been done, but for the most part, the most common form of dual wielding is either one longer weapon and a shorter weapon, or two moderately sized or fairly short weapons to begin with, because they're just easier to handle. You don't have two full-size swords that just kind of get entangled and get in the way. It's just you can maneuver much better. I mean, you can obviously use your two fists. You can dual wield fists just fine. So if you have relatively short weapons, then you can do that as well fairly effectively. And it was kind of funny to see on a recent sparring video, rapier sparring, where some people said, oh, dual wielding, where it was a rapier and a dagger. That's different. Rapier and dagger is perfectly viable. It's quite useful, in fact. And you can very easily catch an opponent's rapier with the dagger, do a thrust. If you have a rapier and a dagger and they only have a rapier, in this case it looked a bit different because, it was Giselle against Lee Smith. Lee is the founder and principal instructor. He is really, really damn good and experienced at rapier fencing. So it wasn't the fact that she was using rapier and dagger that made him score more than she did. It was just the skill difference. And in fact, it was a way for her to compensate for that a little bit. So as far as favorite weapons are concerned, I'm going to chip in here as well. I used to pick sword and shield because, on a battlefield setting, you'd kind of need a shield anyway, unless you're encased in steel. If you have a full suit of plate armor, then you can get away without, and they did. English knights, for example, had poleaxe, say, and no shield, because they had the armor to do that. So if you can, that's not an issue. If you don't, then you pretty much need a shield on a battlefield, otherwise you're kind of screwed. You will turn into a porcupine, a very red porcupine. And other than that, so sword and shield is still very much an efficient combination. There's a reason why it was commonly used. But even though I focus mainly on swords on my channel for particular reasons, I actually prefer polearms. You may not know that. So the reason why I focus mainly on swords is because there are far more of them on the market. It's far easier to get a reproduction sword, and then they're everywhere. Everybody and their grandma and their dog makes them. It's pole arms, not so much, and it's harder to find high quality pole arms. In fact, as far as I know, I really only know Arms and Armor for high quality pole arms. There may be other in fact, there are other makers in Europe as well, quite a number, but it's not that much available here. And then there is the size, which makes shipping more expensive, which makes transporting them more awkward, all of this. So swords are simply easier. But I am trying to get more pole arms to test out as well. So pole arms, there's a reason why they were the main weapon. Swords quite often were a sidearm, with some exceptions. You had knights using long swords as their main weapon, and then of course mercenaries with great swords, and then all of that. Sure, but for the most part, pole arms, spears, halberds, things like that were the main weapon, and they dominated the battlefield for a good reason. As I said, you've got all the reach, you've got all the power, you've got armor penetrating abilities, things like that. If I had to narrow it down, I'd probably go for a halberd, because it combines so many functions. You've got a sort of a spear blade, some kind of thrusting blade at the top. You've got an axe blade. You've got a spike. Pole axes also are very versatile. You've got a spike on top. You've got an axe blade. You've got a hammer. All kinds of different functions, really, for different situations. So I tend to prefer halberds aesthetically. And then halberds tend to be longer than pole axes too, but they're both perfectly viable. So I would have to go for that. Although there are various other ones that I really like too, like the English bill, for example, or Italian builds also look quite nice. Glaives, there are plenty of really nice looking ones.
Oh, like Beck the Corbans?
Yes, those as well. So lots of really interesting stuff. Other than that, as far as swords these days, I have to say longsword, because I've practiced with it the most. I'm the most familiar with it, and that's also made me appreciate it more, because I know more of what it's capable of. And that's a lot. It's a very versatile type of sword. You can do a lot of things with it. There are so many techniques that are either difficult to do with a single-handed sword or not even entirely possible in that way. And you've got all the control, you've got leverage and power, just like with pole arms, of course. And there's a lot to like about them. If I had to narrow it down, it's even further. It's I very much like the Kriegsmesser, but it's single-edged, and I very much prefer double-edged just because it gives you more options. And there are plenty of techniques that you can only do with a double-edged blade. So I'd have to go for something double-edged. The Albion Principe is really, really, really nice. The one opportunity that I had to cut with it was pretty awesome. Yeah. Did you have another kind of favorite that you wanted to mention?
I know you had mentioned polearms, and I guess technically you could say that since I happen to have a new appreciation for the staff, and I guess that would be like a long weapon I would use if I had to. But another one that I've really been interested in, and we've talked about this before, and I'm still jealous of the fact that you own it, even though it's not perfect quality, is the pudao. I kind of like that one because it's kind of like an interesting balance between a polearm and a more personal sidearm, and that it's not. I know there's some pudao in the market that are pretty huge, like like as tall as a person, but they're really supposed to be like, I guess, about as long as my double arm span here, which you can't really see it, but you got like the blade, a dull style blade, and then you got the handle, which is not really supposed to be that much longer than the blade itself. And so you do have reach with a pudao, and you got the leverage, but since it's a little bit shorter, it has the agility of a shorter melee weapon such as a sword. And they've used it to, like they called it a horse cutting knife or a bandit knife. Also, it's got different names. But, you can use it long range, pole arm like, and you can use pole arm techniques with it. But it can also be used, closer range, just kind of, pull, bring your hand closer to the hand guard and, use it for, closer range combat. So it's a good versatile weapon. And I like the agility of it. I find it's employed faster and a bit more, and again, it has techniques that are a bit more variable than you would say use a guandao. Mm-hmm. The guandao is the bigger one. That's the one that a lot of people have seen, that giant one with a heavier blade, which has a lot of power in it, and you definitely can take out large crowds with it. It's definitely a pole arm, but the pudao is used more lightly. It's used more, it has a more agile, technique to it, which is what draws me to that one. So I guess if I had to pick like a kind of in between weapon, it would be that one.
That's a good point. Yeah, I used to not like the shorter pole arms much because in sparring, now that was when we were just messing around on our own without professional instruction before I joined Blood and Iron. There were hand hits galore because you don't have the reach of a spear or halberd, anything like that, but there's no guard, so your hands are totally exposed. However, knowing what I know now, I think that was just, if you suck at using it, then of course you're gonna get hit. So that's really more an issue of experience and all that. So I think it's not necessarily that much of an issue, really. You can rely too much on guards as kind of a crutch to compensate for lack of skill. Which is probably kind of funny to hear that from me because I'm always the guy, guards need some good guards, but it's not all there is. So there are definitely shorter. I mean, the Dane axe is also in that category essentially. It only goes up to about your chin. It's not as long as dedicated pole arms, and you can use it more effectively at closer range. Because that tends to be an issue with a polearm. If they, get past your reach and manage to get control of the weapon and get to within a certain distance, then you are almost forced to draw a sidearm. Not necessarily if you're good at wrestling, and if you're good at using, the butt strikes and things like that, then yeah, you can very much handle yourself. It's just, it's again, a bit of a matter of skill. But that sort of thing is kind of in between. So there are lots of, like the Falks, for example, you can either see it as longsword-ish or more as a short pole arm, depending on how you use it and how it's shaped and all that. So there are definitely plenty of options in between. And I like those too. Well, you already mentioned your favorite sword it's a Jian, and there it is.
Yeah. So. There are... obviously this is my favorite, and simply because I've been practicing with it for a long time, and I happen to like its techniques, even though it's hard to learn and stuff like that, and cut and thrust and all that. But there are other swords that I appreciate. Oh yeah. I have always wanted to learn how to properly use a long sword, simply because I like versatile weapons. That's one thing. I tend to stay away from weapons that specialize too much in one thing. Unless the thing that they specialize in is something that I really, really like. And you can argue that if someone knows what they're doing, they can use it in most situations, but it takes a while to get to that point. So that's one of the reasons why I like the Jian, because it's a cut and thrust sword, so it's versatile. It is a bit better at the thrust, but it can still cut pretty well. Having said that, however, I do like certain single-edged weapons, depending on the technique that's used. Like the Chinese dao, for instance, there's so many different versions of that weapon. You have to be careful when you say the Chinese dao, because then it's like, well, which one? Mm-hmm. Most people, they're thinking of the oxtail saber, which is actually fairly recent in terms of Chinese martial arts development and weaponry. It's actually not that common. It's the goose feather saber, which is a bit more of the more common dao that you'll find, especially used during the Ming and Qing dynasties. And they're employed a bit differently. In fact, I've noticed that the ones that were used by the military, the kind of slightly straighter dao, they still have a curve to them, but they're a little bit longer, straighter. Those tend to have a bit more of a varied technique than, say, the ones that are made primarily for slashing and cutting. Having said that, though, I do like some of the cutting techniques that I've seen with the dao, especially the basic defense of, the wrap around to deflect, grab the guy's arm, and then chop in. It's pretty damn useful. that particular method. But yeah, in terms of like swords and weapons in particular, I just like weapons that are versatile, that you can, use in a variety of situations. And that's why I tend to gravitate toward the Jian. That's why I tend to like the longsword a lot, even though I don't know how it's used. Well, not personally, I don't really know how to, use one because I've never trained in it. I'm pretty sure there's something I'm forgetting. There might be some other weapons that I really, really liked.
Always.
Right now, that's pretty much what I'm...
Since you mentioned very specialized weapons, just one final thing I want to mention is the rapier, because I very much appreciate the rapier. I also appreciate how much skill it takes, because it's... I've practiced a little bit, but, well, a little bit for the context of how much practice it takes. So I know the basics of the rapier, but I'm not good at it by any means. And it's given me insight into just how complex it is. It's absurdly complex, really, and it's pretty difficult to learn. And of course, it's designed against other rapiers. The rapier is not meant really to go against other weapons.
It's funny that you say that, because one could argue that's what happened to the Jian. Even though it started out as a battlefield weapon, it was quickly supplanted by the dao, or the saber. And it became more of a civilian's weapon. I mean, yeah, you did see higher ranked officers still carrying it. It generally became a symbol of prestige, where, higher ranked people would carry it as a personal weapon, and other people just would simply use it as decoration. But it did take just like the rapier takes a certain amount of finesse and skill to use. It was kind of the same thing with the Jian. So with that higher level of technique and, more training involved with it, obviously they would give it to a higher ranking officer who I guess lived long enough through war to be able to use the freaking thing. But it became more of a personal weapon as well. Whereas, generally you'd see sabers being used in warfare. You'd see the Jian generally being used more personally. And that's why I'm seeing a lot. And many times when you're seeing like usage, like weapon against other weapon, with the saber, I see a whole lot of saber versus versus spear, saber versus staff, saber versus pole, things like that. But with the Jian, it's usually Jian versus Jian. Mm-hmm. And that's about it. I mean, you will see it used occasionally against spear or against saber, but more or less you're usually seeing it against another Jian. And that I'm kind of seeing a parallel between that and rapier fighting.
Okay, so I think that wraps it up pretty well. So at the end, we're just going to talk briefly about what has been going on lately, so that people get a bit of an update, because there hasn't been anything in a while, because things have been busy and all that, and I don't want anybody to think that this was some kind of weird scam or whatever. So the fundraisers, both of them were very helpful. They definitely managed to, help you deal with the situation, which was pretty messed up. But I'll just let you talk about it.
To sum up, people already know what happened, but just to sum up, family situation, it was split. I was planning on moving out to Canada, and because of red tape and paperwork not being filled out correctly and people not being able to get it done because of circumstances, I wasn't able to cross the border. So I kind of ended up stranded in Washington. Thanks to, the fundraisers and thanks to connections, both up in Canada and connections I made down here, I was able to find a place, which is right here, land a job, which I've already been working for some time, which is part of the reason why I haven't done a video yet, because the new job is similar to the old one in that I work nights and I work 10-hour shifts. The good news is that this job is not nearly as soul-crushing as the last one, and it pays more, so that's good. But it does eat up a lot of my time. Thankfully, it's 10-hour shifts, and it's a 40-hour work week, so I do have 3 days off, and I'm trying to use those 3 days to get some videos out. The other problem, however, is that it's where I used to live. I at least had a yard where I could do videos. You might remember like when I did cutting tests and things like that. Here, not so much. I literally have a street right in front of my house. And so if they see me swinging around sharp steel, the cops are going to be on me like that. It's now having to try to find a place where I can do cutting videos, where I can do reviews. I'm still way behind on reviewing this freaking thing. which I really want to get out the way, not just for my own sake and sake of the channel, but also because of the guys who made the blade. I want to kind of give a nod in the direction, because spoilers, this blade is actually pretty good. So it's just now finding time to get that out there. But I do want to get at least 1 or 2 videos out before the end of this freaking month, because I'm way behind on what I wanted to do. But in terms of like my overall situation, it is a lot better. Like I said, I have a roof over my head. I've been able to meet the rent. In fact, I was able to meet the first deposit and rent and the month after that because of the fundraiser. If it wasn't for that, I would have been screwed. Mm-hmm. I also came out here with like no furnishings, and thanks to that, I now have, as you can see, I got some. Well, you can't really tell because the camera's up close, but we got some furniture in here. We got some bookshelves. The place is now looking like human beings live in here. So. Again, thanks to everybody who helped out with that. It really came, at the right time during a really stressful moment. But thankfully, that's over with. Even my son is now in a better spot, because now he's going to a pretty decent school, and it's catering to his needs. And he's settling into the area quite nicely. And I'm finding that the area that I've landed in Washington is a pretty decent place. It sort of reminds me of a more hippie version of the East Village of New York. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the village in New York, or what the village used to be like before it started getting more and more gentrified, so to speak. But that sort of like artsy counterculture vibe is really strong here. Just with a more of a kind of hippie-ish, liberal, loving weed side to things. Which that last part that's not really my scene. I don't smoke at all, but it's still, I don't mind the people that do. I guess it's a nice area. I do like the vibe. I like the people. So it's, for all places to kind of crash land in, it could have been a hell of a lot worse. So all in all, things have been working out pretty well.
The way we originally planned things, he'd already be here and we'd be making videos together. And whatever, the way it is now, it'll just have to wait some more. So it's hard to say how long, because the challenge is finding a Canadian employer who is willing to go through the hassle and the costs of hiring a foreign worker, which is, it's crazy. I mean, they've really set it up so to discourage people from hiring anybody other than Canadians. There's a lot involved, and it's not easy.
It's going to take a while, but I do have a plan that if worse comes to worse, it's all about having the right credentials. I mean, yeah, they wanted to make it so that, the jobs are pretty much going to be hiring Canadians first, similar to the U.S., hire, U.S. workers for the most part. I don't want to get into that. But the better your credentials, the more of a chance the Canadians are going to want you. Like if you have skills in a highly, desirable field, if it's something that they're like, oh, we could use more of you, then they're more than willing to let you through. Mm-hmm. And that's basically my plan, to like basically get certification in one of those fields. And it just so happens that one of the things that I've always wanted to get into, and some people have already guessed at this because of my skills and, stuff, is basically IT work, computer work. I've been dabbling in that for a while now. I'm not saying I'm an expert or anything, but I know how to build my own machines. I've been troubleshooting my own software. Troubleshooting software, not my own software. You know what I mean? This is something that I have some knowledge in. So over the next few months, if I'd say maybe about a year, 2 years, I'm just going to go hardcore into getting my certifications in that. Once that's done, that should definitely open up the doors to make it easier for me to cross through. In the meantime, at least what I'm hoping is that I could find some way to at least be able to visit every now and then for certain videos, or Skall's going to be able to come visit me. There was a tentative attempt. It didn't work out too well. We're going to try again later, I guess.
They are incredibly anal at the border. It's absurd. That's all I can say. Short story is things are going pretty well currently, and definitely improved. So that's all good. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Thanks for doing the chat with me. And we'll see your comments later. Have a good one.